Floppy disk drives. I'm laughing as I'm talking about these. We don't use them anymore today, but they do make them in USB. And it's probably good to understand the cabling. You may see them around, at least you'll know what they are. So we have the ancient 5 1/4 inch floppy drive, which you will never see today. You may encounter a 3 1/2 inch floppy, which was good for about 1.44 megs of data. 34 pin data cables, which were used to connect them, plus a Molex power connection. Keeping a floppy disk drive running. Watch out for exposure to environmental conditions and foreign objects getting in there. Schedule monthly cleanings. Nobody ever did that. But for the test, you have to schedule monthly cleanings. I've had drives I've never cleaned in 100 years. I'm not 100 years old though. But check for the floppy disk first for data errors or write protection. So when you get a disk, they actually have a little slide on there that you had to turn off the write protection so that it wouldn't be overwritten. So say you save some data to the disk and you didn't want it being overwritten, you would put that on, right? Or we see that in some memory cards today or flash drives today, which were 128 gigabytes on a flash drive. And back in the day, not too long ago, we had 1.44 meg floppy drives. The little ones, the big ones were even less than that. I forget what they were, but they were less than that. Check complementary metal oxide semiconductor settings. So check the CMOS settings to make sure that the drive was enabled, so that when you inserted it in the computer and connected it to the motherboard, you had to get into the BIOS and make sure that it was enabled. Otherwise, it wouldn't show up at all. Check or change the floppy disk drive cable if it didn't work. So these are some troubleshooting tactics. And change the floppy drive controller if you had a problem. You plugged it into a controller, which went into the motherboard. The newer ones, you kind of connect it directly to the motherboard. They still have these connections, but nobody uses them. And now, like I said, today we use USB, so the newer motherboards don't have these on them at all. And then we replace the floppy drive as needed if nothing else works. Physical characteristics. So they had platters in the hard drives, and in the floppy disk drives, they have little disk that spins around and you're reading on one or the other side. So you had a read-write head on there, and then you had an actuator arm that would swing it out where it needed to go along the disk, whatever sector you were trying to read. And then storing data. This is more representative of a hard drive, not a floppy disk. A floppy disk had one layer, one floppy media. It was floppy, you could bend it, where you can't bend a hard drive. These platters don't bend. So storing data. You have frequency modulation, you have modified frequency modulation, MFM, and then you had run length limited, RLL. You can see as the technology got better, the read-write was smaller, which meant that you could fit more data on that disk. And this is all about the head design. So what's the smallest space that I can use to read a magnetic bit on that disk, right? And then it would just lay them down as it went down to write. Actuator arms, that's the thing that swings the head around, right? Hold read write heads in place, so the actuator arm would hold it exactly where it needed to be. It's basically a stepper motor, if you know what that is. It must deliver speed and accuracy and use one of the following technologies. A stepper motor, older, okay, so that's an older one, had many disadvantages. The voice coil motor, which is newer and uses the head for mapping. So the head would actually figure out where to go along the disk, whether it be a CD or a platter and a hard disk. It might be damaged by head to disk interference or a head crash. So the heads would slide along these platters, and if they ever touched, it was broken. So if you ever dropped it, it would break because the head would bounce into the disk and that's it, it's done. You would damage it. They were very, very, very sensitive, especially after they were worn a little bit. Like the more you use them, they became brittle, the original ones. And if they ever touched anything, they would break. Even humidity, too much humidity could kill them when they were in the early designs. So we need to talk about geometry of these media. So it's the same for floppy disks and the old hard disks and CD-ROMs, and this is still relevant today. not for SSDs and not for flash memory though. So for media that's round and spins, right? So they have tracks, just like a running track. And then we have the sectors, that, you know, how many times can you chop this thing up into a piece of pie? And then we had cylinders, how many platters it had, right? You know, 4, 5, 3, however many they had. And then clusters, what are the segments along the edge there inside of that track that you could get between a track and a sector, right?